Before budget airlines, before plastic seats, and long before pretzels were considered service, there was a brief moment in aviation history when flying meant china plates, bedrooms, and mechanics crawling inside the wings while you finished dinner. This is the story of two airplanes so large, so ambitious, and so impractical, they were basically ocean liners that accidentally learned how to fly. I'm Bill, and this is Buffalo Air Park. Let's dive in. Alright, pull up a chair and pour something strong, because today we're going back to a time when airlines didn't treat you like cargo. They treated you like you were boarding the Titanic, ideally with fewer icebergs and a bit more altitude. This was the golden age of the flying ship, and nothing embodied that idea more than two absolute leviathans of the sky, Germany's Dornier Do X and America's Boeing 314 Clipper. Let's start with the German entry, because subtlety was never really part of the plan. The Dornier Do X wasn't just an airplane, it was a Flugschiff, a flying ship, and they meant that literally. Designed in the late 1920s by Claude Dornier, this thing was so enormous that Germany couldn't legally build it at home. The Treaty of Versailles had basically told them, no giant aircraft, no funny business, and definitely no flying monsters. So, Dornier did what any determined engineer would do. He built it just across the border in Switzerland and said, relax, it's just a boat that flies. And what a boat it was. The Do X had 3 decks, room for dining salons, lounges, and sleeping areas, and perched on top of its massive wing were 12 engines. 12, mounted in 6 push-pull nacelles, like someone had duct-taped an engine factory to the roof. You'd think 12 engines would make it fast. It did not. The original air-cooled engines overheated constantly. The rear propellers were gulping down hot air from the front ones, which meant the Do X usually cruised around 1,400 feet, an altitude best described as uncomfortably close to the scenery. And here's my favorite part, the pilot didn't even control the throttles. Instead, he had an engine order telegraph, just like a steamship. If he wanted more power, he rang a bell, and a flight engineer, sitting in a separate room, manually advanced 12 levers. More power, please. Ding! Danke. It's honestly a miracle they didn't accidentally reverse. But despite all that, people loved it. In 1929, the Do X set a world record by carrying 169 people on one flight, crew, passengers, and yes, 9 stowaways. 9 people just wandered onto the largest experimental aircraft on Earth, and nobody noticed. The plane was so heavy and sluggish that during turns, the crew literally asked passengers to move to one side of the cabin to help bank the aircraft. Imagine that announcement today. Ladies and gentlemen, for this left turn, please sprint to the port side immediately. Naturally, Germany decided to show this marvel to the world by flying it to New York. That trip took 10 months. There were fires, delays. A wing caught fire in Lisbon when a tarpaulin brushed an exhaust pipe, grounding the aircraft for 6 weeks. And when it finally arrived in the US in 1931, the Great Depression was in full swing, and nobody was exactly lining up to buy a flying palace that barely climbed. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Americans were watching and quietly doing it better. Enter the Boeing 314 Clipper. Pan American Airways wanted an airplane that could cross oceans in comfort and reliability, and Boeing delivered something that looked less like an experiment and more like the future. The Clipper debuted in 1938, built using wings originally designed for a massive long-range bomber that never happened. And here's a great detail. The engineer who pitched the whole concept, Wellwood Beale, actually had his wife, an artist, draw the interior layouts to help sell Pan Am on the idea. It worked. The Clipper was pure, unapologetic luxury. 5- and 6-course meals were served on real china, separate dressing rooms for men and women, a dining salon, a spiral staircase, and yes, a bridal suite. It was one-class travel, and that class was wealthy. But the most insane feature wasn't in the cabin, it was inside the wings. The Clipper's wings were so thick they had crawlways. If an engine started misbehaving mid-flight, a flight engineer could crawl into the wing and fix it, while the airplane was still flying. Between 1939 and 1941, they performed 431 in-flight engine repairs. 431 times, someone voluntarily crawled through a tunnel next to a fuel tank to tinker with a roaring engine over open ocean. OSHA would like to have a word. The Clipper proved so reliable that during World War II it became VIP transport. Winston Churchill loved it. Franklin D. Roosevelt became the first sitting U.S. president to fly while aboard one, celebrating his birthday en route to the Casablanca Conference. And then there's the legendary Pacific Clipper. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, the Pacific Clipper was already in the South Pacific. Returning east was dangerous, so the captain made a decision that still sounds insane today. He flew west, the long way. The Clipper circled the globe, flying 31,500 miles through places like Indonesia, India, the Middle East, Africa, and South America, often without proper charts. At one point, they ran engines on automotive gasoline, causing backfires that sounded like cannon fire. A commercial airliner, flying around the world, improvising. They made it home. And then, almost overnight, the era ended. World War II left the world covered in long concrete runways. Land planes like the DC-4 could fly faster, cheaper, and farther without needing harbors. Flying boats, once the kings of long-distance travel, were suddenly obsolete. The Do X ended its days in a Berlin museum. Destroyed during a bombing raid in 1943, none of the Clippers survived either, scrapped, scuttled, or even sunk by gunfire because they were considered hazards to shipping. One pilot summed it up best. We were glad to change to land planes because they were much safer. Maybe so, but land planes never served lobster at altitude, and nobody ever crawled into the wing of a DC-4 while you finished dessert. And that wraps up another tale from Aviation's Stranger Side. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies.